Welcome, everybody, to another. I was going to say this week's. Maybe it is this week's. It would be this week's Less Natter, the intuitive and rather obvious play on words to Less Matters, where I like to have a conversation, or as we would say in the UK, a natter, with people that I respect and like greatly, in the hope that I will learn something and you will all learn something too. And today, I know that we're going to tick those boxes because we have the one and only John Coleman of Complexity fame, and famous for many other reasons. I believe, John, you were voted as one of the top 100 agile thinkers, was it? I'm doing you a massive disservice. Were you like...
Yeah, it's kind of number three. There's this thing called
Number
Thinkers
three.
360. It's more like there's a lot of agile people not big on social media, so there's much bigger people than me out there. But I got to number three on this kind of ladder. I'll take it, right?
Yeah.
Number,
Mate,
it's
three
okay.
three's brilliant.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
wasn't even, I wasn't even on it, so I am in awe.
There's a lot of people who should be on
And
it who aren't on. That's the point, you know. But anyway, I'll take it.
too modest, too modest. John, you're an inspiration to many in the community for the work that you've done looking at Scrum and Kanban, and you've been around in the Scrum world as a professional Scrum trainer for quite some time now. So would you mind giving the audience just a short introduction to yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Ben. I refer to myself as an agility chef. Think of a chef in a kitchen, and the chef is thinking about what wonderful dish they're going to do that day. I was talking to Greek people earlier, some wonderful Greek dish, and then they open the fridge, and oops, there's not many ingredients in there. So I'm kind of like that when I go into an organization. We can talk about what we can do and blah blah blah, but yeah, there's only so much we can do. So I have to figure out what's authentic really. So that'd be my streak really. The kind of the steel thread down through me would be authentic sustainable agility. So that's why I'm involved in the less community, for example. That's why I got involved with scrum.org, with the Kanban community as well, also the lean UX community. I practice most of the time, and I do some training because I just feel more authentic as a trainer practicing as well. How long that'll last, I don't know, but I'm getting away with it so far.
Ah, it's hard. It's hard. How many people out there haven't actually done the doing for a while because you get sucked into, I mean, let's be honest, the comfort and the lucrative nature of delivering training, and it's enjoyable, I think, and I would argue perhaps less risky than actually kind of getting involved in trying to create an island of agile, let's say.
Indeed, yeah, it's much trickier to do these things than I mean, I empathize with a lot of people who come to my workshops and so on, and they have to do their hard yards when they go back, don't they? And I'm much more interested afterwards. Do they do anything? And I do actually interview some of them, and I need to get back into that habit actually, Ben, because a couple of years ago I was interviewing maybe a year later, a year and a half later, how did things go? And I'd find out that there's some really exciting things. It was kind of overwhelmed really by how much progress they made. And there's others, of course, who don't make the progress. They just want to get their badge, and that's fine. But I really get excited by people who are really curious and really want to give it a go. So that's what kind of keeps me excited every day.
Isn't that such a wonderful thing to discover that you delivered some training and it actually made a difference? But you never see those ripples in the pond, do you? You
No,
drop your stone in for training, the ripples happen, and then it's only then I always find it's serendipitous that I then talk to somebody at some point about, oh yeah, that course it changed everything. Absolutely, and you're like, wow, okay. Uh, I wasn't expecting that response. I'm sure you get it more than most, John. So I
no,
think maybe you
I
should.
wouldn't say more. I wouldn't say more, but I do get pleasantly surprised, and it's really nice. I mean, we can't take the credit because they do the hard yards, but sometimes what happens is I have one guy, he came to me, it was a Scrum and Kanban workshop, and he was really inspired in the class. He inspired himself, actually. He was already a great guy, and just kind of gave him a leg up, to the next stage. And he came back to me a year later, and he used an expression which I quote him on now. And so when he gives people a forecast, when we get asked, when we're going to deliver this thing or whatever. He uses
Mm.
a thing called Monte Carlo probabilistic forecasting. It's a nice way using random number generation to figure out, when you might deliver something based on your record. And what he does is when he presents a forecast, he says, well, 85% chance it'll be done by the 14th of November. That means there'll be a 15% chance it won't be done by the 14th of November, but I'll give you a better forecast next week. And he just told them he doesn't
Nice,
know.
nice.
Which, yeah, so I robbed that from him. So I get inspired by some of the people who come along as well. Actually, some of them much smarter than me, and it's really lovely to see them progress as well to become trainers themselves. Actually, afterwards.
Yeah. Well, it's funny now you've shared that tip with our listeners. There's probably going to be a few hundred more people who will now be also using that. So perhaps we need to put some creative comments or some attribute. Why can't I say that word? I need to attribute it to that person in some way in the show notes, just so that people know where it came from, know where the credit goes to. I, without wanting to distract too much, I once coined the phrase "Scrum Mum,"
Oh,
meaning a Scrum Master who is too maternal to the team.
ah,
And I was it was at a conference, I think, or somewhere random, and someone said to me, "Oh, they were being like a Scrum Mum," and I'm like, "Where did you hear that from?" "Oh, I heard it from such and such, who I think heard it from such and such," and I'm like, "Yeah," and I bloody told them that like 2 years ago, and it was just this trail of like picking the breadcrumbs of where it came from. But I love that. I love the fact that we can throw out something quite arguably throwaway, but it resonates with people and they pick it up and they use it. And
and
I
I,
think
I
that
heard that secondhand too, Ben. I heard it from from a meetup I joined, and I was wondering where it came from. This lady said, "I'm a Scrum Mom." I was like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm a Scrum
ah
Mom." So
well,
there you
actually,
go.
no, I would love to take credit for it all, but I'm sure that other people have thought of this as well. I I came up with it with a friend of mine called Nadia, who I was coaching in Jersey, and she was a brilliant Scrum Master, and for a while a bit of a Scrum Mum. Anyway, we were going to talk today, John, and this will be one of a few conversations that we're going to be having, so the listeners can get used to our banter and your voice. We were going to begin talking about Agile Islands or Agile Archipeg. What's that word, John? I've lost my words
Archipelago,
today.
yeah, it's hard to pronounce, isn't it?
Archipelago. Archipelago. Agile Archipelago, meaning a small collection of islands. And I know this is something that you've put a lot of thought and practice into, so I would love it if you could kick us off with a bit of an explanation as to what we mean by this Agile Island or Agile Archipelago, and why is it important to you?
Thank you, Ben. First of all, I probably should talk about what it's not because I'd seen some stuff only yesterday on social media about Agile Islands referred to in a kind of derogatory way that maybe in some big organization where there's maybe 50,000 people, you've got these different departments, they call them functions or whatever. You've got R&D, you've got supply chain, you've got legal, you've got all these, and they do agile within their little department, you see. So they have their own
Mm-hmm.
little thing, and that's what they do, and they kind of work away and they say, yeah, we're going to be agile, and this is going to be great, and then they realize, of course, fairly quickly that these departments are depending on each other. They're actually organized for ease of management.
Mm-hmm.
They're not really organized for ease of delivery or ease of discovery. So the value kind of goes across these departments in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes crisscrosses around. And so when I talk about Agile Island, I don't mean you're within a department and you just do it there. It's a bit more genuine. So maybe I should explain what it is then. So what it is a place where you can be really authentic and sustainable with your agility. It's like when it's really difficult in a big company to do something. There's in some companies, it feels like you're walking through quicksand sometimes. You're
Mm-hmm.
every little change is so difficult, like tiny little things. It's like feels like the Battle of the Somme sometimes. Sorry to bring that metaphor in, but really, really difficult, and it's almost, and sometimes you almost feel like, do we need to start again? Is it like that? Do we need to start again? And so, an Agile Island is in a way starting again. As Joe Justice said to me a couple of weeks ago, sometimes you need to start a new company.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole idea is kind of built upon ideas from other people, like in the less community, they've got this thing called the parallel organization, where you set up this area of goodness where you ask for volunteers, you ask who wants to be in this party kind of thing, and they get trained up and they use informed consent. So in other words, they might get trained for a week on what we're going to do, but then they find, oh no, I don't want that. So they say, no, I'm going to stay out. So that's fine. You can stay out. It's no problem. And we bring in the people that we want kind of thing. So the less community already has that idea. And also Michael Sahota has the idea of culture bubble, which he brought about in his book in 2013. And initially he talked about it as being a kind of a temporary construct, kind of we'd have a cocoon within your organization. And in that cocoon, there'd be people doing very nice agile and stuff like that, but there'd be kind of a border, if you like, be
Yeah.
kind of like you still have some kind of agile leader kind of protecting the little cocoon, and he says you'd have a little adapters along the side. So if someone came along and said, can I have a Gantt chart, you just give them the Gantt chart, because the organization expects a Gantt chart. They wouldn't say, no, you don't have a Gantt chart, you need to embrace uncertainty. I mean, that's what you and I would say. But when you use a culture bubble, you don't attract antibodies from the rest of the organization. You do your little thing inside the cocoon, and the leadership within kind of evolves slowly. They have more agility than the rest of the organization. And initially, when Michael was talking about this, he saw it as a temporary construct, but his thinking seems to have matured between 2018 and now, the time of the recording, 2022. And he seems to be kind of inferring that it's more like an adoption approach now. So it's something you could sustain. Previously, because bubbles burst, don't they? But he's kind of realizing actually that I think, well, I'm just reading between the lines, but paraphrasing it, but I think he's realized that actually a lot of people who do culture bubbles, they actually do sustain, and they do make progress. But it's really about the culture. It's about people. So a culture bubble wouldn't be about doing an agile release train from SAFe, for example, because that'd be very process centric. Now, you might have very good people who are very culture oriented and people oriented, but as such, an agile release train is not a bubble. As per Michael Sahota's culture bubble, it's not a parallel organization as per the less ordinary, because as such, people are being told to join this thing. It's not like they're being, do you want to join this release train? I mean, who wants to join the release train? But
I do like a train.
they
But
get to
maybe,
places.
yeah, exactly. But trains are probably the least agile or adaptable of transport mechanisms as it goes. You're kind of stuck to the rails. But anyway,
Yeah,
carry on,
exactly.
John.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so Michael Sahota did that lovely work on the culture bubble, and his book, actually, I have the book here. It's Leading Beyond Change, it's called, and it's a really nice book, and he's very good at drawing, and it's very good ideas and so on. So the less organization has the parallel organization. Michael Sahota has got his culture bubble, and then in dynamic reteaming, Heidi Helfand has an isolation pattern. So very similar to what Michael Sahota was doing, but she is really talking about it being a temporary construct. That if there's some major problem, or you need to innovate some new product, you get people, you kind of put them in this area, and you kind of cordon them off. But the expectation is that they go back to where they came from.
Yeah.
And there's an element of anticlimax when they go back. And with all of these patterns, whether it's parallel organization, whether it's culture bubble, or whether it's isolation pattern, it's not all sunshine and honey. There's a level of envy as well. The rest of the organization, all you cool guys and gals are working inside there doing that kind of cool stuff, and it can attract its own antibodies, actually. But what I did was I tried to build on what they're doing, and instead of it being something temporary, it being something permanent. So what I'm really worried about is that people would set up this parallel organization, or they set up this culture bubble, or they do this isolation pattern, and they make some temporary progress, okay? And then they almost declare victory too early, say, yeah, we're good now. You know that we're never done with Agile. So when I hear people saying we did 3 Agile transformations, like, they're never done, right? So like, there's already code in that sentence. Like, what are you talking about? You're never done. But anyway, but people think they're done, right?
Yeah.
And so and so then they kind of relax a little bit, And you might even find that I've had some stories relayed to me of people who are retired, for example, who are really, really good from an agile point of view, really brought the organization the right way. They retired, and then the next people who came in after them, they just weren't kind of thinking in the same way or behaving the same way, and the change just unraveled.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to deal with here is how can we avoid that lovely progress from those three wonderful ideas? How can we prevent that from unraveling? And so essentially, you grow this island, you plant it in the sea, the metaphorical sea, in the sea of lots of other things, and you've got the organization metaphorically on the mainland, right?
Hmm.
And they're doing their thing, and we're doing our thing. And you're making sure that there's really agile people coming in. So to be like zero tolerance really for leaders who weren't kind of behaving in the right way from an agility point of view. And we have some tests for that as well in terms of how do we know that that's the case. And essentially, people would do good stuff without all the lethargy, the bureaucracy. You can still demonstrate control in an agile way. Just you need to be open to the idea of being
Hmm.
able to do that. And what I was really worried about was, okay, so what happens when the island is successful? Does it reconnect with the mainland or something?
Hmm.
I used to use the metaphor of basically you have a kind of a ship, if you like, and it needs to redock with the mothership kind of thing. But what I'm thinking here with Agile Island, it'll never redock. The work goes to the island. It's based on volunteers, less than 50 people. Ideally, the Dunbar number, this anthropologist by the name of Dunbar, apparently we can deal with 150 people at the same time in terms of relationships. If you have 100 friends, probably 50, right, at work. So
Hmm.
that's kind of where that number 50 came from. And you kind of you make progress in that area, and you try to demonstrate really authentic agility. People can implement whatever kind of way they want to do agility. They can go back to values and principles. They can use Scrum, Lean UX, whatever, something authentic. But then how does that expand? You see, that's the problem. I don't like the scaling word.
Mm.
So, and unless they talk about descaling, but so how do you preserve that small goodness but expand it? So then the idea of an archipelago is where you have more and more islands,
Yeah.
and the work would transition from the mainland over to the archipelago. So not everything needs to be agile. Some stuff can stay in the mainland. They can stay doing things the way they want to do. That's fine. But the stuff where you need to innovate, where you're doing complex product development, stuff like that, that would move across. There would be agile funding.
Hmm.
You might use beyond budgeting or something like that, or throughput accounting, some kind of model where you're basically reviewing your spend more frequently than they are on the mainland.
Yeah.
Um, and you'd also be looking at, well, how can people grow? How can people grow horizontally? How
Hmm.
can people, they don't have to get to do well in life, to, have more salary and better quality of life and so on for their family. They don't need to go that way. They can go that way.
That way.
They can go horizontally. So that's the basic idea, Ben. It's about authentic, sustainable agility when it feels so difficult to make progress on the mainland and we're running out of time. There's something creating a sense of urgency. We've been disrupted, something bad has happened, some shock. So it could be
Hmm.
I don't know, it could be a war, it could be a disease, or something's happened to the share price, or something's happened to the stock market, but something has triggered a huge sense of urgency. And now we know we can evolve on the mainland over like maybe 10 years or something,
Mm.
but we don't have 10 years. Like we have maybe less than 3 years. And so how do you make progress? And how do you, when after you made progress, how do you avoid that progress from receding? And I
Yeah.
think the secret is basically not allowing the mainland to pollute the lovely agility on the archipelago.
But maybe the
That's,
same is true the other way around. You don't want the archipelago polluting the mainland because the mainland is reasonably stable and working. And I think
yeah,
it reminds me of something I was reading the other day about how it isn't. It is a like speed is a thing. Like you can't deny that speed is a thing, and we need
yeah,
and whether that doesn't necessarily mean the speed at which we're producing output. I much prefer the idea of thinking it is the speed at which we're testing ideas and hypotheses. But speed is a thing. But one of the traps that I see the Agile community falling into is thinking that it has to be an overall organizational speed and trying to scale it when perhaps it doesn't need to, because successful companies, I believe, probably know where they need to go fast and for how long they need to go fast in that area. And if you can find a way to make your finances work and your budgeting work without changing the rate at which finance are doing the annual returns or something, or releasing the budget, but you can still find a way to go fast and that doesn't need to change, and that's going to be less pain and more effect for you if you just create that island and deal with the fact that some of this thing, the rest of the organization will be slow in certain areas, but the rest of the organization doesn't need to be fast or need to adapt quickly, because by having it on your island, you are solving the problem you are faced with.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, Ben. I had a conversation with an executive a few weeks ago, and he was looking for all these stories of successful agility. You know, he was looking for this utopian organization where everything moved over to agile, and I told him he's looking for a unicorn.
Hmm.
Um, Not every part of the organization has to be like that. There's parts that are just kind of pushing product out. They're milking that metaphorical cow. They're very good at what they do. They're very operationally efficient and all that. But while you're milking that metaphorical cow, you also need to be careful as well that you're not getting disrupted and that you've got some capability. So as well as speed, it's about improving capability as well, which is where authentic agile ideas like Agile Island, but there are other ones where
Hmm.
you can essentially do some really cool stuff without being kind of held back by the thinking that's making the rest of the organization really efficient, and it should be efficient. Um, and it's the mixture of that thinking as well. So the measurement, can you even measure like with agility and so on? But if you were to measure, you'd be measuring different things.
Hmm.
If you want a really sweet operation versus we want to discover new value, we want to find new customers, find new products, and we want to be more sustainable. We don't want to be one of these companies that was a one hit wonder with one product and had nothing after that.
Hmm.
It's really tricky. And yeah, it's people looking for that nirvana, looking for, they visited Amazon, they visited Tesla, they visited this, they visited that, and they were, sometimes they were disappointed with what they saw, expecting everything to be perfect. And there are wonderful things going on in those companies, but there are also things that maybe aren't so inspiring. They're just normal delivery. You need to deliver stuff as well, right?
Yeah, we do. And yeah, we do. And agile isn't always the answer. I mean, there are so many other levers that you can pull,
Yeah,
but people
exactly.
people never look into the research on. I mean, there isn't a huge amount of team research out there, but one of the largest studies by people called Price and Toy gives some pretty clear indicators as to how you can increase your performance of an organization. And it doesn't. It talks about agile in the traditional sense of the dictionary definition of the word, but it isn't like an agile book. But it does tick a lot of the agile boxes, and I think creating the island. I'm sure people listening to this are thinking, well, we've done that, and I wonder for those people listening how it turned out for them. Were they happy with the island? Did they get frustrated with the fact that the mainland weren't changing? And did they push against the mainland too much, and it led to their own frustration, and saw their island as a failure rather than perhaps a success that it rightfully was?
Yeah, I often wonder about that too. And I think the magnetism comes back to the way the world works. A lot of the world is capitalist, even in parts of the world that isn't, as elements of capitalism where they're really focusing on the latest results, the current quarter. What are we doing for this quarter? And focus on the short term. And in those setups, I mean, there are companies who have managed to kind of look beyond that. Uh, when I was talking to Joe Justice a few weeks ago, he was saying that Elon Musk has like 1,000 year vision, not like 5+ years, which we would think is amazing. And so it depends on the company, but there would be a lot of companies where the whole I guess the ecosystem within which organizations operate is about the short term. It's about the next quarter, maximum the next year. And so the tenures of CEOs as well are kind of getting shorter as well. So they're not really looking at the 10-year horizon, looking at the 3-year horizon. And I'm kind of wondering as well that for this Agile Island to really work, does it need to be a separate company?
Mm.
That's kind of where my current thinking is. I think you can start with, and you can get the archipelago up and running, but there will be some point, there'll be some pressure point where you have to decide whether you're going one way or the other. Kind of like when you get two companies merging, one dominates, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that is a concern that I would have, and I would hope that there would be so much momentum behind the archipelago that people would see that it's got a different philosophy, it's got different measurement systems, it's not a supplier to the mainland, it's its own thing,
Hmm.
and that a split is probably needed. That's my own thinking on that at the moment.
The one thing that I would love to say that this concerns me, it doesn't concern me because I haven't thought about it enough to really honestly say I'm concerned about about the concept. What it does remind me of is when organisations have got a monolithic old piece of software,
Yeah,
and instead of putting in place the right practices to evolve the architecture and slowly turn it into something which can deal with the future or the current state, they decide to create another version which, because they don't change enough about the ethos and the way they're approaching it, just ends up being a new, albeit rather attractive monolith, and you end up with two platforms that you have to then
yeah,
look after and maintain rather than having the one. And all I wonder is that from my well, I wonder. I will start that again. From my experience, often it's been better to sort out the software you've got rather than create a new version. And I wonder if we're thinking, is the way to really enable or achieve certain levels of adaptability to create a new company? Are there any parallels between these two ideas, or are they, or
yeah.
not? Is there no link
Yeah,
conceptually?
I did some thinking about this as well, Ben. And there's a particular pattern that I used about 7, 8 years ago, and the pattern was invented by, I believe, by Martin Fowler, called the strangler pattern.
Hmm.
And I actually, for people listening, just to give an example, like from plants, there's actually a fig called the strangler fig. It's a fig, and it grows and it strangles other plants. And I had one in my house in Chiswick in London when I was living there. I didn't realize it. I was wondering what. I didn't know we had a fig. I didn't know we had a fig tree. Why are there figs on our tree? Like, what's going on? A fig, a strangler fig, had
Ah.
planted itself in the arm, and then put its roots down to the ground. And as soon as the roots took into the ground, the tree was dead basically because it was taking all the
Mm.
nutrients. I tried to cut that branch off. It was already too late. The whole tree was gone actually. And what it does is it strangles the old plant. And so it's similar with systems. So what I did, it was a big bank, and they were after spending 300 million quid and counting when they asked me to come in. And it was their third time trying to replace the system,
Yeah.
and they were failing this time as well. And the last time they had the same problem you just talked about, Ben. They tried to replace the last time, and they ended up with two systems. So they were
Yeah.
worried that they said we have to do a big bang. We have to have a big bang because we need to get rid
Yes.
of that system. We don't want any transition because we'll end up with three systems. It's like, so like, okay. But they wanted a big window, and I remember David Cameron was he was the prime minister at the time in the UK, and this system would have brought down the UK economy basically. so so like no pressure. I guess I said there's no way anybody is going to be taking that phone call from David Cameron. No one's going to pull that lever, right? So
Mm.
I injected this idea into the team, and they're saying, no, we have to have it, we have to go live, we have to. It's like, yeah, you keep saying that, but you'll never do it. You never pull the lever. And I used lots of techniques from theory of constraints. I used the future reality tree and so on. But the biggest intervention I made was the strangler pattern. So what I suggested to them was, um, I said, it was a banking system, right? So I said, could we just turn the system on for two payment terminals in the canteen in our restaurant? So what? Yeah, can you just like can you put the payments for the payment terminals in the restaurant? Can you put them through the new system? And when they go through the new system, can you also pump them at the same time into the old system? Yeah, yeah, we can do that. Okay. And then can you just compare the difference and just do a reconcile and
Mm.
see does it give the same answer? So they did that, right? So okay, then I was off the scene. I walked off, and they did their own thing, but they kept going with the idea. Then I heard the whole county went live a couple of months later. So they switched the payment terminals for a county onto the new system. There were some differences I heard about, but they did fixes and then reconciled. And then within 4 months, the entire system was live.
Mm.
They used the strangler pattern. They strangled the life out of the old system.
Yeah.
They wrapped it with tentacles, you know what I mean? And wrapped around it and shoved
Mm.
the transactions both ways, reconciled at the end. And what it did was it gave them a tap that they could turn. They could put more transactions through it, and it allowed them to build confidence that they could switch to another system.
Mm.
I often see this as well with companies when they replatform. If they replatform something and they spend so long replatforming that it's 3 years later, and actually the technology in which they're replatforming is now out of date because
Yeah. Yeah.
they're like really in trouble, right? So my suggestion there would be, well, you're probably not going to use your Agile Island on the replatforming because you're already still delivering that, and you're all going through your
Mm.
quicksand trying to trying to get that sorted. But maybe you could use the Agile Island. Sorry, actually, I call it Islands of Agility because I'm not really in love with Agile anymore. It's like you
Mm.
can get agility anyway, but in different ways. But you just pick number two, number three priority, or maybe the technology that underpins that. Can we just replace that then? So can we strangle the old technology out of the replatform so they're still talking to the same
Mm.
APIs, application program interfaces, the plugins to the technology underneath. They can still plug into that, but then can we just change it so we just slot in a new backend basically, and so you
Yeah.
can use it for that as well. But really, I think the Islands of Agility idea is more about discovering the next thing. So, like, let's say you've been milking the cow like forever, and you need to find the next thing, and the next thing is likely not to be on your old platforms because it's the next thing you're trying to do something completely new. And so
Mm.
it's about that kind of an idea, but it can also be for just looking a little bit past your current number one priority, which is going to take you 3 years, and you've loads of other priorities behind that are just backing up.
Yeah.
And while that's happening, you're just stuck. You got a plumbing problem.
Mm.
And it's kind of I'm not saying I recommend the island of agility approach as a standard adoption approach. I mean, the best approach is to kind of bring the whole organization, bring the mainland as well, and either evolve or revolve or find ways. I mean, Les is very good at doing that, for example, taking 50
Mm.
people at a time, and you take more in, and slowly, before you know
Yeah.
it, the whole mainland almost has been done. But if you're really in a hurry and it's just even the tiniest things are difficult on the mainland, that's where you might think about using it.
Yeah. Well, even less, I would say, creates an island because it is
Yeah,
devised for the product group only and only
yeah,
provides advice to the rest of the organization. So I would say that less does, in many ways, I fit into this idea. I mean, people would always argue that it can go further, but I would say that it can fit quite nicely into the idea. There was something.
absolutely. In fact, in my writings on this topic, that's the pattern that I recommend the most.
Hmm.
That you might think of less, for example, for the 50 people, and you might think of less huge or huge less huge. Like if you get many islands in the
Yeah.
archipelagos, huge less huge to kind of keep on top of discovery and delivery and adaptiveness for that whole archipelago. I also talk about the idea of flight levels as well, which is an old idea, but getting very popular the last few years, where you can have Kanban boards, strategic level, coordination level, and so on. Could be supporting less or less huge,
Hmm.
huge, less huge, or it could be an alternative where they just have a different way, a different path. As long as it's some authentic pattern for agility, where you don't have product owners growing like flowers all over the place. So there'd be none of that on the island, right? That's one of the big problems in Scrum, I believe. It's kind of people get
You
lost with
could
that.
you could argue it's one of the problems. It is a problem with Scrum, but it's a problem with people and a problem with the interpretation. Or maybe no, I suppose thinking of a new Scrum guide, maybe it is because I find that a little bit hard to understand. But I only haven't put enough effort into it from a mathematical perspective when it talks about product owners and teams and trying to figure out, well, how does it all work out. In the new Scrum guide, they seem to make it a little bit opaque. But mate, we could talk for hours.
Yeah.
I thought of at least 60 things that I wanted to ask you or say, and there'd be another 60 more after that. But I'm going to call it for this episode, if that's okay,
Oh, thank
and
you.
ask you to come back because there's a couple other questions that we had, and there's also a number of things on the tip of my tongue that I'd love just to start talking about now, but I want to hold them and make a note of them, and we'll come back. And as a reminder to myself, one of the things I wanted to talk about was picking when they're doing your top priority thing isn't the thing to choose. What kind of criteria can we use to decide where we will start? Because I recall lots and lots of conversations about this in many, many organisations, trying to understand, well, what is the right piece of work to start with? And I'd love to pick that up as a topic as well. Not today. Not today.
Thank you, Ben.
Another day. Another day. So,
Thank you so much.
yeah, and I can see my camera's frozen, so I'll just see if I can fix this whilst I carry on talking and say, John, thank you for coming on. It has been nothing but a pleasure. And when we come back next time, we'll pick up maybe some ideas about the kind of things that we can do on our Agile Island or our archipelago.
Thank you so much, Ben. The pleasure's been all mine. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Now, John, it's a pleasure, mate. It's a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will be back with John very soon. So please subscribe, stay tuned, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you very much for your time.